2 in the morning, January. Cold enough that my breath hung in the air, and the street smelled like wood smoke and something chemical. I stepped outside and saw the glow 2 blocks over. A Pierce Arrow XT rolled onto Cresthaven Circle and stopped dead at our entrance gate. The gate the HOA board lowered to 11 feet, over my written objection. The one the board president laughed at in front of 30 neighbors, then spent 6 months punishing me for raising. $2,700 in fines, inspectors on my lawn weekly, a whisper campaign that cost me half the street's eye contact. I stood in my driveway, coffee going cold, watching the crew scramble for an alternate route. Then I looked at the house that was burning. Hers. I wasn't celebrating. I know what 4 lost minutes costs in a structure fire. I was just not surprised. That fire cost her a kitchen. What came next cost her everything else. What would you have done? Be honest. People ask me how a retired pipe fitter ends up dismantling an HOA from the inside. My name is Callum Briggs, and the honest answer is, I just never stopped reading the fine print. I spent 31 years running pipe through steel mills and power plants across the Rust Belt. Not the easy parts either. The tight fits, the wrong specs, the foreman sweating through his shirt at 6 a.m., asking you to solve a problem that 3 other guys had already given up on. I fixed problems. Quietly, efficiently, without a lot of applause. That was the job. When I retired at 59, my wife Darla and I cashed out of Pittsburgh and bought a brick ranch on Cresthaven Circle in Harfield Township, Ohio, a suburb about 20 minutes outside Columbus. Clean neighborhood, big lots, community pool. The HOA fee was $98 a month, which seemed reasonable. I read the CC and Rs cover to cover before we signed. CC and Rs. That's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The rule book the whole neighborhood runs on. I always read everything. Darla says it's a character flaw. I say it saved us money twice. The neighborhood had about 140 homes, a small park, and a wrought iron entrance gate that arched 14 feet high over the only road in or out. That gate had been there since the development was built in 1987. Fire trucks, ambulances, moving vans, all of them had been clearing it for 36 years without a single incident. In summer, it smelled like hot iron and cut grass. I liked it. It looked like the kind of thing that would outlast all of us, which is usually what I look for in infrastructure. Darla liked the neighbors immediately. She had 2 of them over for coffee within the first week of moving in, learning names and swapping stories about the area while I was in the home office reading the HOA financial disclosure statements. She came in, looked over my shoulder at the spreadsheet on my screen and said, "You know, most people just unpack boxes when they move in." I said I was unpacking something more important. She poured herself coffee and went back to the neighbors. We've always had a good division of labor. I was still reading the bylaws. She said I needed a hobby. I said this was my hobby. She was not convinced. And then there was Renata Howell. She'd moved into the neighborhood 5 years before us, bought the biggest corner house, and within 18 months had maneuvered herself onto the HOA board. Within 3 years, she was president. She was 61, always manicured, always composed, and possessed of that specific kind of confidence that comes from never having been seriously wrong about anything, or at least, from never having had to face the consequences of it. I don't want to just call her a Karen. That undersells her. Renata wasn't merely demanding or entitled. She was strategic. She understood that HOAs run on low voter turnout, confusing bylaws, and neighbors who would rather mow their lawns than read a meeting agenda. She exploited all 3 of those facts like hand tools, deliberately, skillfully, without leaving obvious marks. She noticed me at my first board meeting. I noticed her noticing me. I'd asked a simple question. Why had the reserve fund, the community's rainy day account for major repairs, dropped $40,000 in 2 years with no major repairs on record? She smiled at me across the folding table in the rec room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped flies, and said, "We have a CPA who handles all of that. I'm sure you'll find it's all perfectly in order." She moved to the next agenda item before I could follow up. I found out 3 weeks later that the CPA was her brother-in-law. I went home, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a new notebook. The first entry was dated, time-stamped, and written in the same block print I used for job site logs for 31 years. Old habits, good ones. About 18 months after we moved in, Renata unveiled what she called the Cresthaven Beautification Initiative. The plan: repaint the entrance gate, add decorative scrollwork, install new brick pillars on either side, and lower the arch from 14 feet to 11 feet. Quote, to create a more intimate residential feel. Total cost, $63,000, drawn from the reserve fund. I heard her pitch it and felt that particular sensation I used to get on job sites when someone was about to do something irreversible for the wrong reasons. The crunch of gravel under my work boots as I walked into that meeting, the staleness of the coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long in the corner. Everything had the feel of a setup. I raised my hand. What's the clearance on our fire department's ladder trucks? Renata blinked. I'm sorry? Harfield Township Fire Station 4 covers this area. Their Pierce Arrow XT has a 14'2" clearance height when the aerial is racked. You're proposing 11 feet. That's a problem. Couple of neighbors shifted in their plastic chairs. Someone coughed like they'd rather be anywhere else. Our contractor assures us it meets all residential codes, she said. Residential codes set minimums. They don't govern emergency vehicle access. That's covered under NFPA 1141, the National Fire Protection Association's standard for fire protection infrastructure for land development. It recommends a minimum clearance of 13 feet 6 inches on primary emergency access roads. You're proposing to go to 11. I had looked that up the week before. I look things up. The silence in that rec room was the kind you could cut with a pipe wrench. 20 people staring at the table, at the floor, at anything except Renata or me. Then she laughed. Not a big laugh. A short one, from the nose. The kind that says, "You are furniture, and I have already stopped listening." "Mr. Briggs, the board has reviewed this thoroughly." She hadn't. "We'll be moving forward." The vote was 4-1 in favor. I drove home in the dark and typed a formal written objection. I cited NFPA 1141. I cited the specific truck model used by Station 4. I noted that the only other access road into Cresthaven, a back easement off Timber Ridge Road, had been fenced off in 2019 for a landscaping project and never formally reopened. I sent the letter certified mail to every board member. 5 letters, 5 green return receipt cards. All 5 came back signed. Nobody responded. Not one word. Here's the thing about certified mail objections that most people don't know. Under most state HOA laws, a written, documented objection on file creates a paper trail that can later be used to prove board negligence, that they knew about a risk, were warned in specific detail, and chose to proceed anyway. One takeaway: keep every receipt. They're not just proof of mailing, they're proof of knowledge. Construction started 6 weeks later. I watched from my driveway as the old arch came down with a groan of steel and the sharp, metallic bite of a cutting torch. That smell that gets in the back of your throat and stays there for an hour. I took photographs with timestamps. I logged the date, the weather, the name of the contractor's foreman. 31 years of job site documentation doesn't just turn off. When the new gate went up, it was honestly beautiful. I'll give her that. Glossy black iron, gold-tipped finials, tasteful scrollwork. Renata held a ribbon cutting with lemonade and a photographer from the Harfield Courier. She wore a red blazer. She looked like she'd won something. I wasn't invited. I showed up anyway, stood in the back of the small crowd, and took more photos. Nobody talked to me. That was fine. The following week I drove over to Harfield Township Fire Station 4 and introduced myself to the duty officer, a solid, no-nonsense guy named Captain DeAndre Falk. We sat in the bay with the smell of diesel and rubber hanging in the air, and I showed him the photographs of the new gate with a tape measure reference in frame. He didn't say much. He came out the next morning with his own laser measure. He got his own readings. He filed an internal access route variance report with the township, noting formally that the primary access road to Cresthaven Circle no longer met the recommended minimum clearance for aerial apparatus. That report went into a filing cabinet, but it existed. I had a copy. And now the township had it on record that someone with authority had measured the problem and put his name on a document. That's how you build a case, one document at a time. Same as running pipe. You get the fit right before you apply the heat. Renata, feeling good about the gate project, moved on to bigger ambitions. A full pool renovation, new composite decking, a pergola structure over the seating area, and an automated keypad entry system that would, in her words, ensure only verified residents and their guests access our amenity spaces. Estimated cost, $112,000. What she didn't mention at the meeting was that she'd already selected the contractor. What she also didn't mention was who that contractor was. The company was called Ridgeline Premium Outdoor Living. I found the owner's name in about 20 minutes on the Ohio Secretary of State's business registry. It's free. It's public. Anyone with a laptop and a little patience can use it. The owner, registered agent, and sole managing member of Ridgeline Premium Outdoor Living LLC was a man named Garrett Howell. Address: a house in Dublin, Ohio. Garrett Howell was Renata's son. I printed the registration page and brought it to the next meeting. I didn't walk in angry. I walked in the way I used to walk into a foreman's office to explain why a design spec was going to fail. Clear, documented, no dramatics. Before we vote on the pool contract, I said, can the board confirm whether any board members have a financial relationship with the proposed vendor? Renata's voice dropped half a register, the one she used when she was genuinely irritated rather than just dismissive. All vendors were selected through a competitive bid process, Mr. Briggs. Were they? Because Ohio Revised Code Section 5312.08 requires board members to disclose conflicts of interest and recuse themselves from any related vote. The contractor you've selected is owned by your son. I held up the printout. This is from the Secretary of State's database. It's a public record. His name is on it. The room went still. The coffee in the corner had burned down to that bitter, overbrewed smell that sticks to the walls. Somewhere a chair creaked. 3 or 4 neighbors were looking at their phones, which is what people do when they don't want to pick a side. That is a personal attack, Renata said, and I won't dignify it with a response. It's a public record, I said. You can pull it up on your phone right now. She called for a motion to adjourn. 3-2. The pool contract went to Ridgeline 3 weeks later. At a special session she called with exactly 24 hours notice. The legal minimum under the bylaws, and almost certainly time to minimize who could show up. I got the notice at 6 p.m. the night before. Ohio Revised Code 5312.08, and nearly identical statutes in most states, prohibits HOA board members from self-dealing and requires them to disclose and recuse from any vote where they have a financial interest. Filing a complaint with your state's HOA oversight body forces an official paper trail. Takeaway: search your state's name plus HOA board conflict of interest statute. One filing creates pressure that doesn't go away. I filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Department of Commerce, Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing, the same week. I also sent a detailed email to 12 neighbors I'd gotten to know through the Facebook group, laying out what had happened and attaching the ORC section and the business registration document. Just the facts, no editorializing. Let the document speak. Renata's response arrived by certified mail. Nice touch. The following week. A violation notice. The strip of exposed aggregate concrete at the edge of my driveway was a non-approved surface material in violation of community standards. Fine, $250. That concrete had been there when we bought the house. It was in the inspection report. I have the inspection report. I appealed. The board voted 3-2 to deny the appeal. I paid the fine by cashier's check, not a personal check, a cashier's check, because I wanted a bank record, along with a cover letter stating I was paying under protest and reserving all legal rights. Then I called a real estate attorney in Columbus named Odessa Price. Her name had come up twice in the same week from 2 different people who knew about HOA disputes. That tends to mean something. Our first consultation lasted 2 hours. She asked sharp questions. She didn't waste words. She told me 4 things I hadn't known before I walked into her office, and one of them made me sit up a little straighter in the chair. Keep everything, she said at the end. Every notice, every receipt, every email. You're building a file, and right now it sounds like they're helping you build it. I'm not a man who gets angry in the conventional way. Raised voices, things thrown. I get quiet, and when I get quiet, I start counting. I was counting things now, Violations, votes, receipts, inconsistencies. The number was growing. The pool renovation went ahead through the summer. It looked fine, honestly. The pergola was nice. Renata posted photos on the neighborhood Facebook group with a caption about investing in our shared future. Nobody in her orbit mentioned the contractor was her son. Not one word. I replied to her post with a link to the Ohio Secretary of State registration page. My comment was deleted within the hour. By the next morning, I'd been blocked from the group entirely. So I started my own. Real Cresthaven. Residents only. No moderation games. No deleted posts. Just neighbors talking to neighbors. Within 2 weeks, 47 of the 140 households had joined. That's when Renata stopped treating me like an annoyance and started treating me like a threat. I could feel the shift. It had a different texture. She called an emergency board meeting. I found out about it the afternoon before it happened and pushed through a new community rule. Any organized communication among residents intended to disparage or undermine HOA board decisions was a violation of community standards, subject to fines starting at $500 per incident. The language was broad enough to theoretically cover my Facebook group, my emails, my attendance at township meetings, and probably this conversation right here. I took a photo of the new rule and texted it to Odessa at 9 p.m. She called me back in 11 minutes. "That's not enforceable," she said. She sounded almost cheerful about it. Ohio courts have consistently held that HOA rules cannot suppress resident speech about board conduct. This would get thrown out in small claims in under 10 minutes. Don't pay a cent if they fine you. HOA speech suppression rules look scary on paper, but almost always fall apart in court. Ohio courts, and most state courts, have treated rules that restrict homeowner speech about board conduct as violations of public policy. Takeaway: before you pay any fine related to what you said or wrote about your HOA, spend $50 on a 1-hour attorney consultation. It's almost always money well spent. The problem was that Renata didn't know Odessa had told me that, which meant she was confident. And a confident Renata was a Renata who kept swinging. She fined me $500 for the Facebook group and simultaneously brought in a property management company, Summit Property Solutions, to handle enforcement at arm's length. The idea being that if a third party was issuing the violations, it looked less like personal retaliation. Their inspector walked my property 8 days later and found 17 violations in a single visit. I counted them when the notice arrived. A cracked section of gutter. I'll admit, that was fair. A garden hose left coiled on the grass. A mailbox bracket allegedly 2 inches off center, which I measured myself after the notice arrived, and found to be 5/8 of an inch. A loose fence board. Ivy on the side of the house that was apparently unauthorized plant material. 17 violations. Total fines assessed in 30 days, $2,750. Darla sat at the kitchen table with the notices spread in front of her and said nothing for about a full minute. She does that. She thinks before she speaks, which is one of the things that makes her hard to argue with. Then she said, "Callum, at what point does this just stop being worth it?" I understood why she asked. The previous 6 months had cost us real money. Legal consultation fees, the fines I'd paid under protest, hours of my time that I could have spent on literally anything else. The smell of financial pressure is real. It's like a weight across the back of your shoulders. Official letterhead piling up on the kitchen counter while you're trying to eat dinner. I'd seen it break better men than me on the shop floor. A company would pile on write-ups and warnings until a guy just decided it wasn't worth fighting anymore and quietly went away. "When we win," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she got up and poured herself more coffee. That was Darla's version of, "Okay, but you better be right." I went back to work. I had copies of everything, every notice, every certified mail receipt, every time-stamped photograph. Odessa was reviewing something she'd found in the original CC and RS, and 4 houses down, Philippa Strand was watching all of this with the patient attention of someone who had spent 22 years at a daily newspaper, learning how corruption smells before it's visible. "You watching this?" I asked her one evening on her front porch. "Callum," she said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "I've been watching since the ribbon cutting." Odessa called on a Thursday evening in late September. I was at the sink, doing dishes. The kitchen window was open. First real wood smoke smell of the season drifting in from somewhere down the block. The kind of autumn evening that makes a neighborhood smell like it's been there forever. "I've been going through the original CC and RS," she said. "Not the board's community handbook. The actual Declaration of Covenants recorded with the Franklin County Recorder's Office in April of 1987. She paused the way attorneys pause when they know something good. Section 14, paragraph C. It's been sitting there since day one. Any capital expenditure over $50,000 requires approval by a vote of the homeowners, not a board vote, not a board recommendation, a binding 2/3 vote of all households in the community." I set down the dish I was holding. "The gate project was $63,000, I said, and the pool renovation was $112. Neither went to a homeowner vote." "Correct. Which means both expenditures were unauthorized under the community's own governing documents, the ones recorded with the county, which are the controlling documents in any legal dispute. Which means board members may be personally liable for the unauthorized use of those funds. And," she added, "since the reserve fund was used for both projects and now sits at approximately $38,000, well below the recommended minimum for a development of this size, we have grounds to allege breach of fiduciary duty on top of everything else." I stood at the sink for a moment with the water still running. "How many other homeowners know about Section 14C?" I asked. "Based on what I can tell, none. The board hasn't referenced it in a meeting in at least 10 years, and their community handbook, the document they actually distribute to residents, doesn't include it. This is the most important thing I learned in this entire fight, and I want to say it clearly. The original CC and Rs recorded with your county are the legally controlling documents, not the board's edited handbook, not the newsletter, not the welcome packet. The original is public, it's free, and it's sitting in your county recorder's database right now. Takeaway: search your county recorder's website for your subdivision name and download the original recorded declaration. Most people have never done this. It took me 20 minutes, and it changed everything. There was more. Odessa had pulled the full reserve fund financial records under Ohio's HOA disclosure statute. Any homeowner can make a written request, and the HOA must comply within a set number of days. I'd made that request 3 months earlier and received a document that looked clean on the surface. But Odessa had cross-referenced it against actual bank statements obtained through a related legal matter, and the numbers didn't match. $31,400, present in the financial summary. Not traceable in the actual transactions. Not a rounding error. Not an accounting quirk. A gap with no explanation. We didn't know yet where the money had gone, but we had a number, we had the paper, and I had a retired investigative journalist 4 houses down who had broken 3 municipal corruption stories in her career and still kept her source notebooks in a fireproof box. "Philippa," I said when I called her, "how fast can you write?" "Faster than Renata Howell can shred," she said. The next 6 weeks were the most satisfying work I'd done since my last major plant shutdown. The kind of work where you move quietly, check your measurements twice, and completely trust the people standing next to you. Odessa sent a 16-page demand letter to the board. Cease all fines against me pending enforceability review. Provide full, unredacted financial records within 14 days, and acknowledge in writing the existence of the Section 14C homeowner vote requirement. It cited 14 statutory provisions. I know because I read every page twice before she sent it. She mailed it certified to all 5 board members simultaneously. I framed a copy and put it on the shelf in my home office. Not sentimentally. Every document in a legal fight is structural. I wanted it where I could see it. Philippa spent 3 weeks doing what she'd done for 2 decades. Quiet, front porch conversations with neighbors who had seen things but didn't know what to do with what they'd seen. She collected signed statements from 9 homeowners who had witnessed board irregularities, side deals described in parking lot conversations, vendor decisions announced rather than discussed, questions deflected or tabled without response. She built a 4-year expenditure timeline, cross-referenced against meeting minutes, and found 3 more spending decisions made without homeowner approval, each one carefully kept just under the $50,000 threshold that would have triggered Section 14C. Someone had been reading the CC and Rs all along, just using that knowledge in the opposite direction from me. My piece was the piece I was built for, the physical and procedural trap. I wasn't going to touch the gate. That would be vandalism, and I had no interest in handing Renata a legitimate grievance to wave around in court. Instead, I filed a formal written complaint with Harfield Township's Building and Zoning Department, requesting a compliance inspection of the entrance gate under NFPA 1141 and Chapter 18, Section 4 of the Harfield Township Code, the Local Fire Access Ordinance. I attached my original objection letter to the HOA, all 5 certified mail receipts, Captain Falk's internal variance report, and every time-stamped photograph from the construction period. I walked the complaint in by hand and got a receipt. Township Inspector Gilbert Osby showed up with a laser measure 2 weeks later. He was methodical. He measured the gate 3 times and documented everything. He issued a notice of non-compliance. The gate violated the Township Fire Access Ordinance, which required a minimum of 13 feet on any primary access road serving a residential development of more than 50 units. The HOA had 90 days to remedy the violation or face daily fines levied by the township, not the HOA, the actual government of Harfield Township. Renata received the notice and told the board it was being handled. It was not being handled. Meanwhile, Odessa filed suit in Franklin County Common Pleas Court, Briggs versus Cresthaven Circle HOA. 3 claims: breach of fiduciary duty on the reserve fund gap, violation of the CC and R spending vote requirement for both major projects, and improper levy of fines. She also filed a request for a court-appointed auditor, a procedural move she used specifically because it forced full financial disclosure, and because most HOA boards, when they see that filing, immediately start making settlement calls. In most states, a homeowner can petition a court for an independent audit of HOA finances by showing reasonable grounds to believe irregularities exist. The legal bar is lower than most people think. Takeaway: search petition for court-appointed HOA auditor plus your state. It's a real procedural tool, and it changes the negotiating dynamic immediately. Then came the call from Westbrook Tanner. He was the board member who had voted on my side twice but never gone further. I understood why. He had to live in this neighborhood, and Renata had a long memory. But he'd been watching the legal filings accumulate and doing the math on where this was headed. He gave me the login credentials to the HOA's document management portal, full financial records, all vendor contracts, and a chain of emails between Renata and her son Garrett about the pool project. Emails in which Renata explicitly discussed how to structure the bid process so that Ridgeline would win, including which competing bids to solicit from companies she knew would come in high. I forwarded those emails to Odessa. She forwarded them to the Ohio Department of Commerce investigator. I forwarded them to Philippa, who had a former editor at the Dispatch who was, she said, actively looking for exactly this kind of story. Everything was in position. All I needed was for Renata Howell to keep being exactly who she'd always been. She did not disappoint. Once the lawsuit became public record, Renata stopped trying to ignore me and started trying to make people doubt me. The Whisper campaign started within a week. Word moved through her coffee group circle, the people who deferred to her judgment for years, that I was unstable, that I had vendettas against anyone in authority, that my years in industrial work had left me with some kind of paranoia issues. It was carefully vague, nothing you could grab onto and disprove, nothing you could confront directly, just a temperature drop, the kind that moves through a suburb like a cold front, invisible until you notice that 2 neighbors who used to wave no longer do. A man I'd helped carry groceries in from his car the previous winter looked straight past me on the sidewalk. A woman Darla had been friendly with stopped returning her texts. Nothing dramatic, just the slow withdrawal of small courtesies. Darla noticed it before I did. "She's talking about you," Darla said one evening. Not angrily, just stating it. "I know. Does it bother you?" I thought about it for a second. It means she's worried. I'd worked union halls for 30 years. I knew exactly what a smear campaign felt like from the inside, the social texture of it, the way it creates just enough uncertainty to make people hesitate. It's a calculated move. I noted every instance and kept going. Then came the more direct approach. Summit Property Solutions, the management company, issued a formal notice. My Facebook group, Real Cresthaven, Residents Only, was being classified as a commercial enterprise operating from a residential address, in violation of the community's home-based business rules. Fine, $500 per month, retroactive to the group's founding date. Total claimed, $4,500. A private Facebook group is not a commercial enterprise. I texted Odessa the notice. She sent the management company a 3-paragraph letter explaining this in terms they couldn't misunderstand. They backed down in 48 hours without further communication. I screenshot every step of it. But Renata kept escalating. She convened another special board session, 24 hours notice again, and passed a resolution to retain outside legal counsel to defend the association against frivolous litigation. Retainer, $15,000. Drawn from the reserve fund, which was, at this point, sitting below $40,000 total. The move was tactically stupid in 2 directions simultaneously. First, it further depleted a reserve fund that was already the subject of a fiduciary breach claim. Second, and this is the part that made Odessa genuinely smile when I told her, Ohio case law allows a pattern of smaller unauthorized expenditures to be aggregated in a breach of fiduciary duty claim to show systematic disregard for governing documents. The legal retainer went on the list. Every bad decision she made was building a stronger case for us. Then came the move I genuinely didn't anticipate. Renata requested a private meeting with Harfield Township's zoning administrator, a methodical civil servant named Maureen Dix, to discuss resolving the gate compliance issue without community disruption. During that meeting, Renata suggested that the township might consider extending the enforcement timeline in exchange for the HOA making a voluntary contribution to the Township Beautification Fund, a fund Renata herself had helped establish and whose advisory committee she sat on. Maureen Dix recognized exactly what she was hearing. She ended the meeting. She filed an internal report. The report went to the township attorney. The township attorney used the word bribery in a written memo. I found out through Philippa, who had a source in the township building. I walked into the township clerk's office that same afternoon and filed a public records request under Ohio's Public Records Act, ORC 149. 43, asking specifically for Maureen Dix's meeting notes and any internal communications related to the meeting. The documents arrived within 5 business days, every word of them. Ohio Public Records Act, ORC 149.43, and nearly identical statutes in all 50 states require government agencies to release records of meetings and internal communications upon request. Most people don't know this applies to township staff meetings too, not just city councils. Takeaway: public records request, plus your state's open records statute, is one of the most powerful and underused tools any citizen has. Those meeting notes went to Odessa, to the Department of Commerce investigator, and to the Columbus Dispatch reporter Philippa had been cultivating for 3 weeks. Renata was now fighting on 4 fronts at once: civil lawsuit, state investigation, township enforcement action, and active press inquiry. She had an attorney, paid for with the money of the neighbors she was harming, and I have to assume that attorney was having some difficult conversations with her. She didn't slow down. That's the thing about petty power. It genuinely doesn't know how to slow down. It only knows how to push harder. While Renata was running in 4 directions at once, I was doing what I'd always done on complicated jobs. Move methodically, close the gaps one at a time, and don't let the noise make you sloppy. I went back through the easement documentation for the Timber Ridge Road access road, the one that had been fenced off in 2019. I'd flagged it in my original objection letter to the HOA 18 months earlier, but I hadn't gone deep on the paperwork at the time. Now I did. What I found was this: the easement had been granted to Harfield Township, not to the HOA, not to the developer, to the township, specifically and explicitly for emergency vehicle access purposes. The grant language was clear. The HOA had subsequently installed a wooden fence and planted a row of arborvitae screening shrubs along the easement boundary, blocking it from the road, without ever obtaining township approval. They had physically obstructed a government-owned emergency access easement, without permission, and left it that way for 4 years. I brought the easement documents to Captain Falk. Falk brought them to the township fire marshal. The fire marshal brought them to the township attorney, who sent a formal demand letter to the HOA. Remove all obstructions from the Timber Ridge easement within 30 days or face enforcement action. That was now the second formal legal notice from Harfield Township about emergency vehicle access at Cresthaven Circle. The first, the gate non-compliance notice, was already past its midpoint on the 90-day clock. The HOA hadn't touched either issue. Through the Real Cresthaven Facebook group, which now had 61 member households, the most it had ever had, I organized a petition calling for a special homeowners meeting. The CC&Rs allowed any group representing 15% or more of households to demand one, and the board was legally required to hold it within 30 days of receiving a valid petition. I needed 21 households. I got 43 signatures in 72 hours. The board's own attorney confirmed to Renata that she had no grounds to refuse. She scheduled the meeting for the last possible day, a Tuesday in mid-January, 7 p.m., the rec room. She was betting on the cold, the timing, and the general inertia of suburban life to keep turnout low. People don't like driving out at night in January. I know that. She was counting on it. What she underestimated was Philippa Strand. Philippa drafted a one-page summary of the case. Clean, factual, no editorializing. The reserve fund gap. The two unauthorized expenditures. The Garrett Howell conflict of interest. The gate non-compliance and Captain Falk's variance report. The blocked easement. The township bribery report. All sourced, all documented, with a reference list at the bottom. She had it laid out like a news brief because that's exactly what it was. On the Saturday morning before the meeting, 12 volunteers from the Facebook group fanned out across Cresthaven Circle. Cold enough to see your breath, the street smelling of wood smoke and frozen pavement. They bagged and doorstep delivered the one-pager to all 140 homes in just under 3 hours. By Saturday afternoon, I was getting texts from neighbors I'd never spoken to. Then the call I'd been waiting for came in. The Ohio Department of Commerce investigator had completed the initial review. Probable cause to believe that Renata Howell had committed financial self-dealing in violation of ORC 531-2.08. The matter was being formally referred to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office for review of potential criminal charges. Nothing filed yet. These things move slowly and deliberately. But the referral was real, it was documented, and it meant that a prosecutor now had the file on her desk. That same week, Odessa's motion for a preliminary injunction came back from the court. Granted. Partial freeze on the HOA's reserve funds. No expenditure over $5,000 without court approval. Effective immediately. The board's attorney sent a brief, tight-lipped acknowledgement. I sat in my home office that Friday evening and looked at the shelf where I keep my notebooks. 14 of them now, going back to the week we moved in. Every entry dated, time-stamped, initialed. Every document cross-referenced. 31 years of job site documentation. Turned out it was good practice for other things, too. 3 days until the meeting. I felt the way I used to feel the night before a major system startup. Everything checked, everything confirmed, and all you can do now is show up and let the work speak. And then, 2 days before the meeting, on a Friday night in January, Renata Howell's kitchen caught fire. I heard the sirens before I understood what they meant. I was in the living room with a book, and when that sound cuts through a quiet Friday night in January, that particular Doppler drop as the truck turns onto a residential street, something in your chest tightens before your brain has figured out the logic. I walked to my front door and opened it. The orange glow was 2 blocks over. I could smell it now. Wood smoke and something sharper underneath. The electrical bite of a kitchen fire. I stepped outside in my boots without going back for a coat. The fire had started on her stovetop, spread to the cabinet above, and by the time a neighbor dialed 911, it had reached the kitchen ceiling. Not a small fire, the kind that moves if you don't stop it immediately. Engine Company 4 was dispatched at 9:47 p.m. The dispatch log is public record. I looked it up the next morning. The Pierce Arrow XT turned onto Cresthaven Circle from the main road and came to a stop at the entrance gate. I watched from the end of my driveway. The crew had been briefed on the access variance. Captain Falk had made sure of that after we'd talked months earlier. They knew the front gate was low. They had a backup plan. The Timber Ridge easement. Except the fence was still there. The arborvitae were still there. The HOA had received the township's 30-day removal order 6 weeks ago and done nothing. Not a single phone call to a contractor. Not a board vote to authorize the work. Nothing. The order had apparently landed in the same place all the other warnings had landed. The truck could not clear the front gate. 4 inches of aerial clearance wasn't workable, and you don't force a piece of apparatus through a gap that size. They reversed, went around the block, found Timber Ridge Road. The crew had bolt cutters for the padlock, standard equipment, and cut it in about 8 seconds. The fence panel swung open, but the arborvitae, 4 months of winter growth, dense at the base, branches interlocked. Getting the truck through required Captain Falk himself on the ground, with a handsaw cutting the largest branches back, while 2 crew members advanced on foot, carrying hose toward the house. You don't wait for the truck when somebody's kitchen is on fire. You move. 4 minutes and 20 seconds from the time the unit reached Cresthaven Circle to the time water was on the fire. I know this because it's documented in the incident report, which I requested the following week under the Ohio Public Records Act. Nobody died. The fire was contained to the kitchen and part of the adjoining dining room. The house stood. 4 minutes and 20 seconds in a contained residential fire. One that hadn't reached the structural elements yet was survivable. In a different fire, it would not have been. Every firefighter knows the arithmetic. 4 minutes is the difference between a kitchen fire and a house fire and something worse. I stood in my driveway in the cold and watched the red lights move through the neighborhood. I want to be honest about what I felt. I didn't feel satisfied, not for a second. I've been around enough industrial accidents to know that being right about a safety warning is never something you celebrate. You warned them, they ignored it, and now someone's house is damaged, and a crew of firefighters had to work harder than they should have had to because of a decision made in a rec room for aesthetic reasons. That's not a win. That's a preventable outcome that wasn't prevented. I took photographs. I always take photographs. 3 days later, the special homeowners meeting. 91 of the 140 households were represented, in person or by proxy, the highest turnout in Cresthaven Circle's history. The rec room was standing room, the air warm and thick with the smell of wet winter coats and old coffee. Renata walked in with her attorney at her shoulder, blazer and pearls, expression locked. A Columbus Dispatch reporter and photographer were in the back row. The township fire marshal was there. Maureen Dix from the zoning office was there. Odessa Price sat at a table at the front of the room, with 6 inches of printed documents in front of her. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. Odessa walked the room through it. Reserve fund discrepancy, unauthorized expenditures, conflict of interest with the pool contractor, gate non-compliance, and the fire department incident. She put the incident report up on the screen. Blocked easement. The attempted bribery report from Maureen Dix. The state criminal referral. 1 slide per item. Factual, sourced, documented. Every claim attached to a document anyone in the room could independently verify. When Renata tried to speak, her attorney put a hand on her arm. The vote, 74-17. Renata Howell removed as president and board member. 3 of the 4 remaining board members resigned on the spot. Westbrook Tanner stayed. On her way out, she stopped at the door, turned, looked at me. "This isn't over," she said. I looked up from a conversation with Captain Falk. "No," I said, "but the hard part's over for us. It's just getting started for you." She left. The room stayed. What followed was the satisfying, unglamorous work of repair, the kind that doesn't make for dramatic video, but is the whole point of all of it. The court-appointed auditor confirmed the reserve fund gap, $31,400, traced through a series of small transfers to an account connected to Renata's husband's side contracting business. The Franklin County prosecutor filed charges, 1 count of theft in office, 2 counts of financial exploitation. Renata entered a plea agreement 8 months later, full restitution, probation, and permanent disbarment from serving on any HOA board in the state of Ohio. The civil lawsuit settled. The HOA's insurance carrier, faced with documented board negligence and the fire incident, paid out. My legal fees reimbursed in full, every improperly levied fine returned with interest, and a contribution to restore the reserve account to its required minimum balance. Garrett Howell's company, Ridgeline Premium Outdoor Living, returned $43,000, representing the margin over fair market value on the pool contract. The gate was raised back to 14 feet within 60 days. Captain Falk came out himself on completion day and measured the clearance with a laser. He signed off in writing and kept a copy for the station's files. The back easement fence came down. The arborvitae were removed. A gravel pull-off was installed for emergency staging. The new HOA board, 7 members, elected at a full community meeting with 68% household participation, rewrote the governing documents from the ground up. Mandatory annual independent financial audits. A rotating 3-person homeowner oversight committee with real-time read access to all accounts. A standing policy requiring competitive bids from at least 3 unrelated vendors for any work over $10,000. No exceptions. Westbrook Tanner became treasurer. He's thorough and he's honest, and he's exactly what the job needed. Philippa's story ran on page 3 of the Columbus Dispatch and was picked up by the Associated Press wire. She got calls from HOA residents in 7 states in the first week. She turned the coverage into a recurring column on community governance accountability. It ran for 2 years. I'm told it's required reading in at least one Ohio municipal government class now, which I find genuinely funny. I got a lot of emails from people I'll never meet. People who were in their own version of this. Different states, different HOA presidents, same fundamental dynamic. I answered everyone I could. Most of them just needed to know that the tools existed, and that using them was worth the effort. The neighborhood learned something too. Not just about HOA governance, about each other. The 2 neighbors who'd stopped waving started again. The woman who'd been suddenly busy every time she saw me on the sidewalk brought Darla and me tomatoes from her garden in August. Darla made BLTs. We sat on the porch and ate them and didn't talk about the HOA once. At the first block party under the new board, the following July, a warm evening, charcoal smell and citronella torches, and kids in the sprinklers at the far end of the park, I stood up and made the only speech I gave through this entire thing. We're taking some of the settlement money and putting it to use. Starting this year, Cresthaven Circle is establishing a community safety scholarship, $2,000 annually, to a Harfield Township student pursuing a career in public safety, firefighting, EMS, law enforcement, emergency management. Someone who's planning to be the person who shows up when things go wrong. I looked over at Captain Falk by the grill. Captain Falk's department nominated the first recipient. He raised a can of sparkling water. The neighborhood clapped. I sat back down. Darla handed me potato salad. I looked down the street at the entrance gate. 14 feet, 2 inches of clearance, black iron and gold finials catching the July evening light. Renata was right about one thing, honestly. It does look beautiful. She was just wrong about everything else.
4 minutes and 20 seconds. That's how long the fire truck was delayed the night Renata's kitchen burned, because of a guest she lowered for attending. Over a warning she laughed at. She didn't lose because Callum was smarter than her. She didn't lose because the system finally worked. She lost because she stopped respecting consequences. And consequences don't care whether you're the board president or the guy she was fighting for a garden horse on his lawn. Callum won because he did one thing most people don't do. When someone in power dismissed them, he didn't get loud. He got organized. Every receipt, every timestamp, every certified letter, 14 notebooks over 2 years. He let her keep swinging, and he just kept writing things down. That's the real story here, not the fire, not the lawsuit, not the Blair deal. It's the fact that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one making the most noise. It's the quiet one in the back row who read the original CCNRs before the meeting started. You ever been laughed at by someone who had just enough power to make your life difficult? Drop it in the comments. Your stage, your situation, one life. Subscribe if you want more. New story every week. And the next time someone in a position of small power dismisses your warning, take notes. Just take notes.